All right, thanks for tuning in. My name is Lucas DeCicco. I'm a PhD student at the University of Kansas. And today I'll be giving you guys an update on our red-tailed hawk tracking project focused on wintering birds in northeastern Kansas. I'd like to start out by recognizing the collaborators on this project. Bryce Robinson, who has now started his PhD at Cornell, is really leading the project now. And he's rolling it into his PhD studies there. Brian Sullivan and Mark Robbins were integral in getting this project going. And Luke Klicka, who is now teaching at Peru State College in Southeast Nebraska, just started collaborating and has one transmitter on a bird in Southeastern Nebraska that he's using with undergrad research classes. And the financial support of Kansas Ornithological Society, Burroughs Audubon, Hawk Migration Association of North America, and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, including private donors, basically makes this entire project possible. Buying a whole bunch of transmitters is not cheap, and we appreciate the support. We're going to start by reviewing distribution of red-tailed hawks in North America. So we're all familiar with the species. Red-tailed hawks are widely distributed across North America. There are also more southern populations that I'm not showing here. Most populations are migratory, so we see much higher phenotypic diversity here in Kansas in the winter than in the summer. That's because all the ones that look different have migrated north. So basically what I'm going to be talking about from here on out is based on breeding or nesting distributions. This map depicts roughly our current understanding of the breeding distributions of certain subspecies in North America. Up in the Alaska and northwestern Canada, we have Harlans, or the subspecies Harlani, which is a polymorphic, so it has a light and dark morphs and intermediates. It's a very cold colored bird, often with a gray tail. Subspecies Abieticola is the northern boreal forest subspecies across Canada. It is basically a more well-marked version of what we have nesting around here in Kansas, which is borealis. There's this northern Great Plains, southern Canadian prairies subspecies called Crideri, which is very pale. And then in the West Coast, which we typically don't get much of in Kansas, are again polymorphic subspecies Western Coluris and a more coastal subspecies Allocensis. So what's really driving kind of the questions of this project are the phenotypic variability that we see in red-taileds. So down on the lower right is a very typical breeding bird for Kansas. And then in Kansas, we see this huge amount of phenotypic variation in wintering birds. Pictured are all birds that we've caught in Western Kansas, or northeastern Kansas, sorry. And the interesting part about this system and the species is that most of the intricacies and complexities of interaction between these subspecies happens in northern Canada and eastern Alaska, places where we really have very little information, both due to difficulties of access and to really low breeding densities. So our strategy is basically, instead of trying to go to these really difficult areas to access and survey to understand, basic information like limits of phenotypic diversity in populations or distribution of certain subspecies, we're taking a different approach. We are capturing targeted individuals on the wintering grounds where we have this concentration of phenotypes, and capturing those phenotypes that we find particularly interesting. That should provide us with the most information, either really good breeding locations of clean looking Harlani or intermediate looking birds. And we are tracking them with these GPS GSM transmitters pictured here on a bird. These transmitters have been working wonderfully for us. They collect GPS point data and transmit those data across cell networks. The birds that we're tracking actually go offline per se during the breeding season, but they continue to collect GPS data, and when they get back in cells network reception, they'll download all their data. We're also taking genetic samples of all the birds that we're catching to add a genetic component to this project. So a bit of background on where we're at in this project. We started basically permitting processes in 2017, 2019-20 was our pilot season. Essentially, we got funding for 2 transmitters and deployed them on what we thought could be an unknown dark morph of Abieticola. And then this past year, things really kicked into gear. Bryce started his PhD studies at Cornell. We secured more funding, and we ended up deploying 12 transmitters in northeastern Kansas. So although the project is growing, Bryce is now deploying transmitters on the East Coast, and he has colleagues that are deploying transmitters in Wisconsin and Utah and Idaho. Our focus in northeastern Kansas and the Great Plains is really at the heart of this, because we get basically the most phenotypic variation wintering in Kansas and the Great Plains area, but particularly eastern Kansas. So these are photos of birds that actively right now have transmitters on them that were captured in northeastern Kansas. These are representatives of the subspecies Abieticola, that more well-marked borealis of the northern boreal forests of Canada. These are examples of Harlani, the subspecies based primarily in Alaska and Western Canada. 2 individuals of the dark morph or dark intermediate morph are on the right. 2 individuals of the pale morph are on the left. Interestingly, on the wintering grounds, these pale birds could easily be confused with the pale criteri subspecies. And we've also marked a number of dark birds that we really don't know what population to assign them to. Originally, since they're wintering so far east, it was hypothesized that they could be an undescribed dark morph of Abieticola. However, it could also be more dark morph influence from Western Coluris populations. And many of these individuals also show some Harlani characteristics. So we actually have 5 birds of this general phenotype mark now. And the birds outlined in the dark on the left, we have 2 years of data on. So what we're learning, we at this point in time don't have all the birds have not come back into cell service. So these are essentially preliminary data. However, we have good spring migration routes for a number of birds. So these track lines represent all the taxa that I showed you above and full tracks for a number of individuals. Given the diversity of phenotypes and subspecies that we marked in northeastern Kansas, it was extremely surprising to us that all individuals basically took the same trajectory of migration. Now we did start to end all, and this represents Harlan's, Abieticola, etc. We do start to see a pattern with Abieticola starting to drop off and breed earlier. So like in Alberta, and for example, the 2 farthest tracks that went into interior Alaska, those are both dark Harlans. To really kind of give some perspective, essentially, despite everything going in the same trajectory, we're essentially picking up birds that are nesting in this wide swath of breeding distribution. And all those individuals and all that phenotypic variation are wintering regionally in northeastern Kansas. So that really drives home the importance of Kansas and the Great Plains to provide incredibly rich and important wintering grounds for a huge swath of red-tailed hawk breeding distribution and variability. We have about half the birds have provided us with nesting locations so far. However, I'd like to focus on a couple interesting things. So these 2 birds nested in northern Alberta, about 150 kilometers apart, so very close on the grand scheme of things. Interestingly, one was what we would consider pure Harlan's, really clean Harlani on the left. It's a pale bird. And the other one was what we'd consider a pretty clean standard Abieticola. This brings a number of questions. One, it's fascinating that these two phenotypes are nesting so closely together. Basically tells us that our assessment of distributions is likely oversimplified, but that could have been a good assumption anyway. And some really interesting questions in addition to that, like why haven't these plumage types homogenized if things are breeding so closely together? And yeah, it's really interesting pattern. We were very surprised when we got these nesting locations back. We also have multi-year data on 2 individuals now. Both individuals nested in northern interior BC, and they did so in both seasons. So these are those kind of dark, uncertain phenotypes. And the track lines here, orange is one season, gray is the next season. These 2 birds went back to the exact same territory. We also have round trip data on a couple individuals. Here highlighted is this dark or intermediate Harlanite that bred in northern interior Alaska. What's most noteworthy about this is just how tight the northbound and southbound migrations are. So we're really starting to kind of get a feeling for the annual cycles of these birds, and it can be, summarized by essentially really high site fidelity, not only to migratory route, but to breeding sites. We now have data of the birds returning to the exact same territories and to wintering sites. We've got multiple birds now that have returned to exactly where we captured them last spring or late winter. For us in Kansas looking at red tails, that basically means that some of the really interesting birds in the winter that we see are coming back to the exact same territory year after year after year. So this project is not by any means wrapping up. We have secured additional funding, and we plan on deploying more transmitters in Kansas this coming winter. Some of our focus is going to be a little bit different. So previous seasons have really focused on clean or pure looking birds of certain taxa, see where they're distributed or breeding. We're really interested in getting more of a assessment of the plumage variation. So targeting intermediate type birds between Abieticola and Harlanite, and get that kind of plumage or phenotype transect across different taxa and see how that translates to their breeding distributions. We'd also love to tag a crider eye or two and start getting some information on that taxon. If you guys are interested in this project, you can go and check out our website. Link is here. Just a couple of things about what you can look at there. Bryce maintains this website. You can check out the blog. He regularly posts updates when we have interesting updates. So when a number of birds start checking in this fall, post an update on that. Also under research and movement ecology, there's a list with photos of every bird that is carrying a transmitter. So you've seen all the ones in northeastern Kansas, but all the birds on the East Coast and in Utah and Idaho are also on here. And we try to keep this pretty well updated when we tag new birds. So with that, I appreciate your time and look forward to answering any questions.